you everyone for attending from around the world. This is great. Welcome, Tom. I'm looking forward and excited about this presentation. Tom and I have pushing 40 years of LMS and e-learning experience on both the selling and the implementing side and the buying side and learning best practices. In my career, previously I spent, before Talented Learning, I spent 13 years selling high-end learning management systems. And among my many claims to fame is that I could never figure out how to win a global LMS opportunity. And it wasn't until I met Tom that I realized I was thinking about things all wrong. So I'm pleased to join you here, Tom, to gather your expertise and help you share your expertise here on global learning in 2017.
Yeah, excited to have a conversation with you, John, and excited to have the group online. And as Marina said, definitely don't hesitate to post in the chat. Both John and John will be watching the chat and making sure that we are keeping track of questions as they come. And then, as she said, we'll open it up at the end as well.
Outstanding, outstanding. All right, let's get going here. So this, we planned what we think is a really interesting and high impact agenda here today to take you through the current state of global learning technology in 2017. And so what we're going to talk about.
Sorry, John. I'm sorry to interrupt. It seems that there's an issue. Tom, you have an issue or a challenge?
Yeah, I muted our audio, but it looks like I'm back on. I hope.
Yeah, I am as well. So
okay.
But this day, yeah, I think it's one of the participants. Maybe post it in the chat if they're having an issue.
All right. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay. So what we're going to cover here today is global learning challenges. So what do global organizations face that are challenging from a learning technology perspective, and finding learning technology or making your existing learning technology, learning platform work. We're going to be looking at it from a couple of perspectives here today, from a single country that's facing out and delivering content globally to different parts in a single language or in multiple language. But we're also going to be looking at today also through the other lens of a multinational, international organization that has multiple training groups and multiple training audiences and different audiences. So throughout the day, we're going to look at both pieces of that and through the lens of managing localized and translated content, the functionality of a global learning management system on 3 different levels. So what does it mean to be a global learning management system? We're going to talk about challenges on how to find a learning management system. What are some key secrets around implementation and support that really impact success of both types of global implementations? And we're also going to touch on the tricky technical and security hurdles that global organizations face that are challenging and easy to derail a learning selection project or a global learning deployment. And then most importantly, we're going to have Tom share on all of these proof points around case studies of organizations doing what we're outlining here throughout today. So it's going to be interesting, and throughout we're going to have polls that you can share and help us with the presentation here to make it the most meaningful. So let's start off with global learning challenges, and before we do that, let's figure out who's on the line here. Let's get to know you here. Thanks everybody for right on top of my poll here. So, which best describes your organization? You have single language content that
John, we lost audio. Do you mind unmuting?
There we go. We back? Are we back on audio? Okay,
You're
great.
Back. Go ahead.
Are you a multinational organization, number 3, that has multiple training groups and multiple training audiences that you're trying to juggle? Or maybe you're here just because you know Tom and you know it's going to be a fun presentation. or anything else, chat in the chat box. So it looks like we got a smidgering here. What I run into a lot, Tom, is U.S. companies now that are going global. So they are based in U.S. and a lot of times in the software industry, and they're delivering English-based content all around the world. That seems to be a common scenario, but my understanding is that you see the exact opposite of that, or in addition to that, a lot more from other parts of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a mix, right? And I think that depending on whether you're doing, sort of a full global deployment, or you're an organization that's in, 2 or 3 countries, right? Or you're trying to expand your business. I mean, we find often there are organizations that are in Europe that are expanding, into the U.S. or into South America, and we find the other way around as well, right? U.S. businesses that are, more similar to Blackboard, right, where you're growing and expanding into many countries around the globe. So it really, really varies.
Cool. So it looks like at least 2 people joined just because of you, Tom. So let's go on to the next one. But an even distribution, it looks like, across the groups. All right, I want to clear that out. We'll go ahead here to the next one. And for those of you that have deployed learning technology and are struggling, if you are struggling, is it LMS the functionality? Is it the technology? Is it the implementation and support? Or is it the cost of learning technology? Anybody bumping into these type of challenges? And
I'll go ahead and throw the poll.
Put that poll back up. Oh man, people jumping out right away, Tom, on functionality, which isn't surprising because that's the one that trips everybody up. But also technology and security, which trips up everybody, certainly from a U.S. base, because I think we take a different approach than a lot of the world does, and just unaware of what's happening across the world. But yeah, look at that LMS functionality really taken off here. But implementation and support too, of course, that is going to impact the success of these for sure. All right, well, let's keep going, Tom. Yeah. Show this. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I mean, it definitely looks like 1, 2, and 3 heavily weighted on LMS functionality with the group that's with us today, and about 50-50 on the remaining responses for technology and security and implementation and support. So, it's interesting, right? Because when you're in the business of working with customers, it seems like cost comes into play too, but not in our poll.
Yeah, no doubt. Nobody identified cost though as one. So I guess there's lots of budget here on the call. Nobody's worried about money. But without a doubt, what we identified before and then certainly verified is that the 4 key challenges really cycle around business, functional, technical, and service. In today's presentation, what we're going to do is talk about the challenges specifically in each one of these areas, and then talk about the solutions or best practices or education or information that you need in each one of these areas to educate yourself on what's available. And we'll get into that in just a second here. So from a global business challenge, these are the things that. So at Talented Learning now for the last 4 years, I'm co-founder, CEO, and lead analyst of Talented Learning. We were founded really to research this growing, burgeoning LMS market that now has hundreds of vendors, even 700 vendors. And so I've been spending my time going solution by solution around the world and categorizing what functionality and requirements they have, including the global requirements. And these are the things that I continually bump into, is that the ability to work with multiple countries, with the different language and cultural hurdles, moving outside of your comfort zone of wherever you live, to get the local adoption at all the local levels, whether you're pushing that out, from one country to all over the world, the local adoption, but then also if you're trying to make a U.S.-based system work, perhaps inside a different part of the world, and kind of forcing that to work. And then even more complex is, the ability of juggling those different learning groups that simultaneously need to upload content and deliver content and to run their training business on a local or regional or business unit level also. And though not on this call, license model and cost is something I run into all the time from talking to people in different parts of the world of what's affordable or what's not in learning technology. What are you seeing, Tom, out of these global business challenges that you're talking to buyers around the world every day? What rises to the top?
Yeah, I really think I think that we tend to overcomplicate things, and I think that's the case regardless of the situation in life. And so I really think it's largely around sort of adoption once people get things going, right? Or maybe you made the wrong choice, right, of the solution or partner that you're trying to work with, right, and it's not working out that well. But if there are many different good choices that are out there. And then it's sort of working with your people and making sure that you've got a good plan. We'll talk more about that. But this idea that somehow magically, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, that magically the technology is going to fix all of your company cultural engagement issues, right? It's just not going to happen, right? So you've got to get all the stakeholders involved, and you've got to have a really solid plan to get it adopted well. And I think the other part that I'm seeing a lot of, and it's not just me, you see it if you read any of the analyst data, whether you're reading the Burson by Deloitte or McKinsey or stuff from yourself that's out there, it's that the landscape's changing, right? So a lot of the corporate LMSs and players that were out there 20 years ago, it was self-paced e-learning, right? And that was it. Well, self-paced e-learning, right? It's sort of like we used to say about technology, right? It's great until you actually put people in it, right? Well, now they're communicating, right? There's a lot more collaboration in these systems. There's a lot more blended programs that are being offered, and when you have more of that interaction, what occurs is that it creates more complexity within the systems. It creates more interaction within the systems. It's heavier within that, and it requires more planning, right, to be successful as it's being used more.
Go figure. Preparation leads to success, but we'll go hammer on that today. The obvious that everybody forgets. The other part is, so you have all those global challenges, and then right away that translates into operationally. So once you get done that planning and preparation, but operationally, buyers hit the wall or implementers hit the wall of learning technology all the time. And why is because of language localizations were not the right ones, or an organization expands their footprint and then the vendor doesn't have the right localizations and it becomes expensive, or it's a translation. We'll get into that versus just a localization. Or you have the same piece of content in 10 different formats, or the same course that in 10 different language localizations. How do you manage that from a catalog standpoint? And what's your approach of not going crazy having millions of different courses, even though it's really just localized versions? And then there's the challenge of just delegated administration and domains. So the ability to have different regional areas where you have different catalogs and content and administrators and business rules and notifications and reports and integrations. At that domain level, responsive LMS. The mobile, as Umberto is saying, just the mobile aspect of being able to deliver on all devices, all browsers, all types of mobile devices, all this, and the lack of consistency, across an LMS ecosystem. And so, it might be mobile or in Brazilian Portuguese for the learners, but maybe not for administrators or things like that. And so, just the global challenge of having the right localization across the whole footprint. Any thoughts, Tom, on the...
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to speak to the point that Umberto and Alfonso said in the chat around responsive design. This is really, really critical. It's something at Blackboard that we've focused quite a bit on early on, and it continues to get better. But I think a lot of companies just didn't see the adoption right away of mobile, And so they didn't make the investments, and then all of a sudden it skyrocketed, right? And these companies didn't have, products that were responsive. So it's a huge issue, and we're constantly evolving there. When you look at the different things that you mentioned here as well, let's just admit the reality. This is complicated, right? It's not easy, and I like to quote Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek, who says, "We're all experts, yet nobody's the expert." Right? The reality is the data available today on all of these different topics is enormous, but it changes every day. So, what I would say is this issue, when you're talking about global functional challenges, to me, there are two things that are most important in any project when we've done, these massive, global efforts. The first is, as we said earlier, which is planning and sharing of information, right? When you go into it and you're working with your vendor or partner in this, I believe you have to look at it as a partnership. And you have to share very openly the information that how you're trying to deploy this. We see instances where organizations say, you know what, English is our global language for training. So all of our training content's in English. But maybe your navigation needs to be in the local language, right? Blackboard's in 24 different languages so that at least people can get to the content, right? Definitely you need to be responsive, as we talked about before. But then the second part of that effort is, just communication throughout the life cycle of any project, right? So you have to lay it out, and you might forget, maybe a business leader comes forward and says, we have this functional challenge that we forgot to bring up during the implementation, but we've got it. So then it's just keeping that conversation and open lines of communication.
Yeah, no doubt. Umberto also says here in the chat about usability being another big challenge, and of course I see that in my daily life of reviewing all the learning management systems. It's funny that they'll either take two approaches. They're either built for administrators, or three approaches: built for end learners, or built for both. But what you find is a lot of historical systems were built for administrators, and that's really carried through that techie-like design to the front end, and that just is just a terrible hurdle for global adoption, for sure, or local adoption for that matter. So the technical challenges, we're going to get into this, but it's the varying laws and security standards on privacy laws, so hard to keep up on and get expertise on from a vendor standpoint, unless you're living in it on an everyday basis, or from a buyer standpoint, unless you're living it on an everyday basis. Just the whole issues of deployment of where to put this LMS. Do you put it in the cloud? Are you so worried about security, or do you need to be so worried about security that you're running it locally? Do you have it hosted with third parties? This is a big decision, and where are the servers, and where is it hosting, and how are you distributing content across these different points of security? Some serious challenges there for organizations to work through before they find a partner. The multiple points of integration we're gonna get into of just how challenging it, like a normal, in a normal local-based deployment, you might have one or two or three different points on integration, but with organizations that grow through mergers and acquisitions, these different points of integrations grow and grow and grow exponentially, and make a real technical challenge to juggle all of them simultaneously. Mobile accessibility we talked about, and we'll get into here in a little bit on multi-currency support, which is a whole new ball of complicated wags for sure to work your way through that, and the taxation issues. And so, Tom, you want to?
Yeah, so
real life example.
Absolutely. So one of our customers that we work with today is Sena. So Sena is essentially the workforce development organization that is trying to take the country of Colombia into the future. And 278 facilities, 114 training centers. They actually have mobile both buses and boats where they provide online training, and they've been working with Blackboard for a number of years now. Currently, they have over 3.3 million learners today. So I just want to highlight it gets complicated, right? And when you're thinking about all of these different things, one of the things early on that we talked about was that idea of rolling it out and getting adoption, right? So what they started doing was branding, branding buses and branding these things to get people excited about not just the young people that were taking training, but continuing education and training for adults as they were trying to move them into new careers and evolve into those new jobs that come up all the time. So I just wanted to share that example. There's a video which I'll paste into the chat as well if you want to check it out. But it can get pretty intense. And this is one where it's just a countrywide deployment, but pretty massive.
Wow.
So I would say that we've dealt with every one of those things that you mentioned on the previous slide here.
This is my first example in my life that I can think of where there was open boat training. You don't see that every day. You don't see that every day. That's what a great idea. Great idea. All right, thanks for that. And then there's the service challenge, professional service challenge. And this is a real interesting one because what's happened in the industry is there's been the explosion of pure cloud-based LMS providers. And because they're pure cloud-based, they've really adopted a self-setup and a self-deployment model. And what that's resulted in is, a lot of entry-level solutions that are now enabled that, buyers have some options at the lower and expensive end that they never had before. But the downside is that a lot of these hundreds and hundreds of LMS providers or learning platform providers more broadly that exist globally really keep skeleton, if any, professional services staff. So project managers, business consultants, learning experts, talent development experts, and the technical experts. And because of the lack of that, it's easy for companies around the world to spend time and cycles and effort reviewing these type of organizations to only find out later on down the road of they don't have help if they ever get stuck. And getting stuck is easy to do. As you said, it's pretty complicated. And so what you see then is the most successful, or Tom, this is what I think I see, and is that when local teams support, it's more successful than when no teams or pure foreign teams support.
Yep, I'd agree. I mean, I'd like to just cover this one by saying that hybrid hosting and support models have been what we've done from the beginning. So for example, we aligned with several partners around the globe right out of the gate, because we realize that in each country there's going to be unique rules, there's going to be unique support needed. There, obviously you've got the language situation, so we didn't just hire direct people, but we have partners that are in each of these countries to help us with those local support models. And then we set up a follow the sun model so that we can address any region with support issues that come up. And we've even got a hybrid hosting model, so we've got a situation where we do offer cloud SaaS, but we've actually got an ability to do private cloud as well. But I think as we're going to this cloud trend, what you realize very quickly is what you call cloud SaaS is it takes away a lot of the unique business situations that organizations have. So it doesn't always work. And I understand people are trying to control costs, but that one size fits all doesn't always work, right? And especially as we get into sort of security, as you'll talk about in a little bit, creates some issues, and not every client can go down that path.
Yeah, exactly. All right, what's the Arab National Bank up to?
Yeah, so just real quickly on this one, I think we had them speak. I actually co-led some sessions in Milan a few weeks ago, and I just think it was really interesting as I was on stage with Mohammed and talking about some of the things I've said earlier, which is managing constant change, right? Complying with audit and compliance requirements they're always changing. Reducing, always the organizations are always looking to reduce costs, right, and increase profits. And how do we do that while we're trying to improve culture and engagement and efficiency of our staff and have a learning embedded culture? He talked a lot about this, and And I think what I'd say with Muhammad in this case is that he really emphasized that, having his business partners and really aligning with the business. And I think that the advantage that we've got today that we haven't had in the past is, if you look at the Deloitte data around culture and engagement and learning, those are the three, culture, engagement, and learning are the three top priorities of CEOs right now. And I like to talk about the fact that I think that's because the pendulum has swung to the employees from the employer. With social media today and everything like that, they have to help their people learn and grow. So we've got a really unique opportunity, I think, today to get our C-level executives to invest. Because they realize if we don't, we have the potential that our top 20 to 30% of our people could leave the organization. So he talked a lot about that, but still leveraging and building those relationships, right, with the stakeholders across the business and saying, this is really important to our organization if we want to continue to grow.
Yeah, in the U.S. alone, we have approximately a 4.5% unemployment rate, but at the same time, we have 5.6 million open jobs from just open at any given time. And so without a doubt, that pendulum has swung to back to employees, thankfully.
Yep.
All right. So all of that brings into, for anybody that's looking to upgrade their current learning management system from a global standpoint, or expand their global footprint, or get into global learning for the first time to support customers or channel learning. This is what you're going to find. You type in global learning management or learning management system, and you're going to bang into approximately 700 different learning technology solutions. As you go outside the U.S., they use the name LMS less and less and come up with creative learning technology and learning business and learning platforms of different synonyms. But in the end, they do very common things of bringing learners and content together. And then the further you'll dig, you'll find out that these learning companies have corporate, academic, association, e-commerce, commercial applications that they specialize in. And each one of those specialties brings unique functionality and integrations and business processes that the other ones don't have to care about. And then there's hundreds and hundreds of US-based vendors, but still just as many from around every corner of the world developing SaaS-based global solutions. And as we talked about, there's such a degree of what global means, just by the different natures of single language or multinational organizations, how that translates to what global actually means. And so you could go to the vendor community and say, I'm looking for a global LMS, and believe it or not, you'll have 700 of them say, great, we're global. But it's more important than that. You need to define what you need from these different specialties, and from a service standpoint, and from a technical and from a global functionality standpoint, and be articulate about that if you have any chance of cutting through the noise of the LMS industry and just finding one. And so the best place to start is really the business impact. And really, you can't buy or deploy an LMS if you're not thinking about this business impact part of this. Is how are you going to move the needle in your organization? If your goal is to continue to be a cost center, that's a terrible goal in 2017. It's really about how you can aid your business, make a learning impact difference, whether that is with your employees, as Tom was talking about, or outside of your organization. And so we'll get moving here as we've got a lot to cover. So the global learning challenges that we talked about, these different levels, now we're going to dig into these a little bit more, but the business impact. And when we talk about the business impact of moving the needle, there's really three different categories. You're either impacting costs, so you're bringing down the cost of your organization, or you're increasing the revenue somehow, or you're improving business processes, things like product rollouts, or onboarding of employees, or onboarding of partners or customers, or improving customer satisfaction cycles. But the opposite of having a global LMS is having lots of separate regional LMSs. And that's a strategy a lot of organizations take. It's easier just to work by yourself sometimes and try to collaborate. And so there's duplication of costs, there's duplication of of content. There's really duplication of licenses and maintenance and servers and technical costs to maintain these different applications. So the impact of the global LMS is really to impact these three different areas. And smart global training organizations and smart training organizations in general find out a way to start measuring each one of these, or whatever they can measure, to justify their current impact, and use that as a benchmark to make a broader impact on the organization. What do you think, Tom? Is any of these stand out when people come to you? They get their money somehow for budget. And what are they trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really cuts across all of these, and I'll share a little bit of an example in the next slide with the Mayo Clinic, and talk a little bit about the things that they're trying to think about as they rolled it out. If you want to just go to the next one.
Yeah, perfect.
Oops.
Whoop.
Go ahead. So yeah, so I think as you're looking at this, all of those different factors come into play. I mean, I think you've got to think about, what are we trying to do as an organization? And that can be very different depending on the organization. In this case, Mayo Clinic, great, 152,000 users that they train annually. I also presented with these guys recently. Now, they actually rolled out, though, in more of a phased approach, and I think that wasn't necessarily by design. It was by need, right? So they started out in some of their medical facilities and some of their medical schools, and gradually they had a deployment that really grew over time. So but what they thought about was, availability, reliability, global access, right? Partnership within their business stakeholders. As they rolled this out and grew over the last 10 years. So it's been exciting to partner with them, and they are global. So they've got organizations all over the U.S., but they also go across Philippines, Singapore, United Arab Emirates, and all with this sort of mindset. Speaking of the business goals. If they have an organization that's committed to patient-centered care, they want to partner with those organizations. And it's funny, as I've presented, they have worked with so many different organizations, and most people know who they are.
Yep. That's great. I think the reason we want to tie in to that business impact, because that business impact naturally then rolls into the functionality that you require. By defining that business impact and what you're trying to change, it helps you as the base to come up with what global functionality that you need. And so let's get right into that. So in the sake of time, we'll go ahead and cut to the chase on this one. There is a difference between localizations and translations. And maybe you could chat in if anybody has experience with that. But one of the things that we wanted to start off from a functionality standpoint is when people say global LMS, the first thing that comes to mind is, we got so languages, or 11 or 3 or 20 or 5, depending on what's out there. But that's only the first level question, because a lot of the languages inside of learning management system, it's not the content, it's the labels, notifications, reports, menu items, all the metadata around. But a lot of it, the easy way to do that is you can do it for free if you just get a Google or a machine translation. And so, but it's imperfect. As anybody that traveled globally, if you just try to translate any language word for word, you sound terrible and can't make anybody understand what you mean when you do that. And to some degree, the machine translations are like that. So converse to that is this concept of localization. Tom, you want to explain localization, what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So just real quick, I just want to highlight, we actually work with a partner called We Localize, and what we have them do is they actually do not just translate the language, but to the appropriate dialect, and use the appropriate language as well, right? Use the appropriate word based on what region you're in, show the time the way it's supposed to be reflected in the UK, right, versus Latin America or whatever it may be. And what's interesting is even, when we work with them, we recently had a localization where it came back. We do a hybrid model, so we pass it to a partner to review every time as well. So that hybrid model that I discussed earlier is really important, because you can't just rely on sort of that first take from the company that's doing it. And on top of that, a lot of our providers, or I'm sorry, our partners, are actually localizing their content as well. So I mean, it is critically important, and you have to think about Spanish in Spain is not the same as in Argentina. So what level of detail are you going to get at, right, if you're going to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's the key. So if you're one of those circumstances where you're US based and you're just delivering English based content, you might be able to get away with translations, but if you're in local areas with local learners and administrators, you need localized languages. All right, so here in our research, just a quick slide. So I've now solicited responses from over 100 vendors for this, just to see what languages, localizations or translations were out there. And certainly English and American English, not certainly, but they top the list, and it goes down. Just to give you a snapshot here of what you might see and why this is relevant is organizations, it seems obvious, but it doesn't always get done, is you really need to be diligent in articulating exactly what languages you're going to need now and in the future, and use that as a key part of your evaluation process, because adding additional languages, especially localizations, is typically or can be an expensive thing to do, or you got to put it on your own shoulders to do it as a buying organization. And so it's one of the things that you want to identify up front and use as a qualifying. So let's look at quickly here on functionality at 3 different levels. I wrote a nice, though I am biased, blog post on this a couple of weeks ago on talentedlearning.com on global LMS functionality, where I get into specifics or perhaps deeper specifics. But we like to look at it like in 3 ways. And one is, as we talk about, this single language developed or delivered locally or globally. And so what you'll find out there with a lot of LMSs, they have those machine translations, not localizations. They have sometimes management, but it's not really built around compliance. So it's there for to show things, live events in the local time zone, but it's missing that next layer of compliance, which is and continuing education management, which becomes somewhat of a nightmare. We'll talk about it a little bit. The language is always just in or the help is in one language. It only supports one currency, so it's it's very much like a local solution. It just happens to be accessed by people around. So that's a common basic. Out of those 700, hundreds and hundreds will claim to have levels of this content. Localized versions of the content always stand alone. So if you got 10 versions of the same HR course, it's exactly that. Even though it's the same course, just localized versions. But it starts getting trickier in a hurry, and that's where we head into this intermediate global functionality. And think of this mainly HR training based. So this is managing your global employees, whether they're, no matter where they're at, no matter what business unit they're at and what region they're at. And it gets into those things that we talked about, that, the minute that you have a second training organization, then you need domain and audience management. And domains being, separate areas inside the LMS, conceptual areas where you can, have regional students and content and catalogs and help and tutorials and be able and delegated administration, and kind of run that as a localized instance, but it's all part of that broader LMS environment. So the organization gets enterprise reporting and has the advantages of enterprise sharing of content or not sharing of content, so you can duplicate that. They have the localization packs as opposed to the translations, and all areas of the application, or most areas of the application, are localized equally, so that there's not those gaps that we talked about. And the localization actually is pretty smart in a lot of cases of being able to be driven by user profiles or user preferences, or even just sniffing the browser and seeing that particular language localization and serving the LMS up in that. Tom, any comments on this concept of domains and segmentation that you care to share?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would say is I think we should just jump into implementation and support because I think it's really important, and we want to make sure we leave time for questions. But invoicing in the right currency, you talk a lot about extended enterprise and the idea that, if you're charging for courses, it's so important to make sure that those invoices come out. I can't tell you how many times in the early days we ran into those issues, with customers and, currency issues. So, nobody likes to be billed incorrectly. I don't care who you are, right? So
Sure.
that becomes a really big issue, and there's more to it than that, of course, but that's one that we run into all the time.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt, no doubt. We have that here in the advanced capability is the minute that you take any of the above, that intermediate or basic level, and you add commerce to it, and now you have a whole new mountain of hurdles to think about and overcome, from not just invoicing, but processing credit cards and POs, and the process in different parts of the world, and currency exchanges, and collecting taxation and reporting that taxation, and reporting those funds. All those different things are considerations that global e-commerce organizations come to and require experience from the vendor side to help think through all these things if they're not expert about it. Let's go ahead and we'll get into that implementation and support.
Great.
And so, we've touched on this a couple of times, but I just can't stress enough. And it's not just with global implementations. It's really with all implementations. It's getting your house in order before or during this the selection process, but independent of the vendor. And if you have multiple groups working together, or multiple departments, or multiple regions, if you're just going to try to wing it, it just never works. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and we're gonna hit on some of the other items here, but to me, as we discussed yesterday, the most important thing is to lay out what your plan is. And I would rather have a customer spend more on the implementation in the first year than on the software. And maybe maybe I'm not supposed to say that, but I'd rather have them invest there. I'd rather discount so that we can make sure that the project is a success. Because without a great kickoff, and without a go live on time and on budget, what's the point? And that's what I always emphasize to folks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got a question from Tom here, just about the previous invoices. What's the best pricing model? Pricing model is really based. That's why you go back to that business of what you're trying to impact. But employees, a lot of times it's named users, and for selling content, it's consumption based. You pay for what you use. Is typically what we find to be the most agreeable to those type of selling situations. So local support, Tom. You were hitting on this before, but this is your expertise. What do you see around the world? If you're from Colombia, you want to work with an American deployment team or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is they want to be able to receive support in their time zone, in their language. It's that simple, right? So, and they want a team that can actually deploy locally. Now, especially if you're talking about a global deployment. So you've got to be able to put people on the ground to be able to support them, right? So it really comes down to that. It's not complicated, but it's expensive, right? So meaning it's expensive for the provider. And so you have to really think about, when you go into a new region, what are the costs of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, without a doubt. That makes a lot of sense. And so how the Cancer Council of Victoria handle that?
Yeah, so I'll talk just a little bit about them, and then I think we can jump into the next topic. But the reason I bring them up is because they chose a solution, what they called their learning hub, that couldn't scale, right? So scalability, also as you're looking to expand, in this case across Australia, New Zealand, right? This wasn't even necessarily a global deployment, but a countrywide or multi-country deployment, right? And they had a solution that just didn't grow with them, right? The solution couldn't handle the number of users they were putting on the system. It couldn't handle a lot of the things that we talked about in terms of the deployment. And so you really do, it's difficult when you've got all these different providers, but you have to really think through, what are really the requirements? And requirements have to be bigger than, oh, this provider told us that they had a customer that's in the same space that we're in Australia, right? It's got to be more than that. And I think that a lot of companies out there, they think, oh, you give them a reference, that reference is in our country, or that reference has a global deployment, then it's great. It's going to work for us, right? I think people have to think bigger than that. And a lot of times, they don't, right? They oversimplify those decisions up front. And the opposite happens, of course, as well.
Okay, great. Technology and security. Let's quick take this poll. We've got enough time for this. For those of you that are here, how are you deploying your global LMS? Are you on a multi-tenant cloud SaaS? Are you in dedicated hosted environment? Are you having a third party do it? Do you do it on premise? You don't know? Chat it in. Love to see what the folks here are doing. In US based, I remember a time when it was 75% on premise and just a few. That's when I joined the industry. It's just starting to get in the hosted environment, and now what I run into is so much is in the cloud and very little on premise. What we're seeing here is kind of an equal distribution of across. Nobody's on dedicated hosting, a couple on cloud SaaS. So yeah, interesting. All right, let's keep that moving, Tom.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, it definitely seems to be, across the board, and there's even some folks that don't know, which does happen on occasion, right?
Yeah, and so really that is the three main versions here as we look at deployment. Used to be a big thing in the U.S., big decision point. Now it's getting easier and easier, but not globally. And that is, do you need the cloud? Do you need hosted? Do you need on-premise? And where do the servers need to be located? Does it matter? What are the local regulations in terms of what you can store, what data you can share, what data you're not allowed to share, and all that really comes into the deployment. And what I find from LMS buyers is a lot of times they deprioritize this for earlier on in the cycle, and they get enamored with the functionality and the localizations. But for all of these requirements, you can't do that. They're all equal, because any one of the service or support or functional or even business and now deployment have the ability to sync an LMS selection process late in the cycle, or result in a substandard purchase. And so it's important to work with your IT or whatever your security standards are, and bring this all the way up to the beginning of the sales cycle or the buying cycle, and make sure you communicate that effectively, because fewer and fewer organizations, for example, have the ability to do on-premise.
Yep, and I'll just, as you can go ahead and advance to the next slide, John, but what I'll say is that I'm a huge fan of cloud, but I think SaaS is tricky, right? Because a lot of people are going to, and the difference being, right, cloud is where you're hosting it, right? I think everybody should be in the cloud. I ultimately believe that, and I think that we overcomplicate, or I know it's a complex situation as you're looking global, and especially we see it in Europe, right? With people very concerned about privacy data and all that, and that gets very challenging, and I think you have to approach that on a country by country and customer by customer basis. But I'm a huge fan of cloud just because the costs are it really has driven the costs down. But when you get into software as a service and the vendor tells you, what, we're deciding what capabilities you're going to get, and you can't really influence effectively that roadmap. I think we're in a place right now where we're not really sure where to be, and I really like it to be customer centric and focused on the customer. So I like the hybrid model that we have at Blackboard, where people can still add capability and work together with us to determine what's in there through a building block or an add-on to the application as well. So I think we lost John here for a second, so I'll talk about it. When you're thinking about data security, there are a lot of things to consider. Where are you putting your data? Who's going to host it for you? Do you need a CDN, right, or something to speed up the connection? And how do you handle commerce and taxation? And as I said, sort of with the Simon Sinek quote early on, I don't think we have all the answers. One of the goals of this is that these are the things you should be thinking about, and we're really hopeful that this presentation will help you to be thinking about all of those different topics as you're making decisions around your global deployment. Yeah. John, it sounds like we've got you, and we can jump into the next one.
Yeah, back in. I got booted. And then last thing from a technical standpoint, just to put in your consideration, is the data sources. I mentioned that at the beginning of this presentation, but this is something that you have to take the time, like all these requirements, to document up front. But because of mergers and acquisitions of global companies, every acquisition will then come with its own HR system, sometimes CRM, sometimes SSO, and multinational global organizations are in a different phase of integrating these different acquisitions. Sometimes it's all done, everybody's on one system and it's easy, but a lot of times they're
So I'm not sure John's having some internet connectivity issues, and I know we're running a little bit short on time, but what data that you're going to be bringing in. One of the things that we talked about yesterday is just all about the data that you're bringing into your LMS. Where is that coming from? What are those data sources, and what data do you want to push out so that you can analyze that data and determine how you can help your people to be more successful. So I think there's a lot of different things that need to be considered here as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. And so that brings us to the end here. We're going to continue on with questions as long as folks are asking them. So go ahead and put them in the chat box. We'll open this up. We saved the Who Are We to last year so that we made sure we got through the content that we're hoping to get through. Talented Learning, we're now in our 4th year. We're an independent learning technology analyst, research, and consulting firm. We're out to figure out what the world of learning technology is, what all the new technologies are, what all the specialization is, and do exactly what we're doing today by writing blog posts and partnering with industry experts to share stories and expertise and thought leadership on learning technologies. So whoever has those similar challenges can get smarter, make smarter decisions, and be more successful. So that's who we are. I encourage you to follow our blog at talentedlearning.com.
Yeah, and Blackboard, we're the largest learning company in the world, and I'm a big fan of the power of why. We do this because we want to inspire the world to learn, regardless of where people are, what the device they're using is. Have quite a large customer list, and many folks don't know that we play in the corporate and government space, but today I have about 1,800 clients in that space, and with some pretty significant names. So you see those on the slide. So I know that we've got questions. This tells you a little bit about the solution, but I really want to jump into those questions, and you can grab the slide deck after the fact. So just really want to continue with questions for John and I. It has a bit of a summary here. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar on Global LMS Success. Talented Learning and Blackboard thanks you. For more information, feel free to go to Blackboard or Talented Learning's website on the slide.